what do you think is if someone's going to focus on a couple, let's say, three is arbitrary, but everybody loves
Yeah.
three. I don't know why people love three, but we do.
Right.
But if you're somewhere around there, pick a couple of different attributes
Mhm.
that you think have the biggest delta of impact on somebody's life
Yeah.
if they start to work on those, and also the greatest ability for us to actually change those different characteristics. So
Yeah.
it's like both of those factors. If you're going to find like, okay, here's a couple of these attributes, you can change it, and if you do change it, it will dramatically change your life.
Yeah, I would say hands down it's the grit attributes, and it's 4 of them. It's courage, adaptability, perseverance, and resilience.
Courage, adaptability, perseverance, resilience.
I believe, while I try not to put any value on the attributes, I believe those are probably the most important elemental attributes for human existence, right? Because those speak to how we operate in the world in every capacity, right? And so, because the mental acuity attributes are fine, how I process information. Drive attributes, hey, listen, you don't have to be necessarily driven. You can do what you want to do. Even leadership and team ability, those aren't really have tos. But the grit ones are have tos, and I think if people were to focus on those and look at where they stand and developing those, that's when they start learning what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation: how to effectively move and perform inside of these events that happen that we have not predicted, that bring up our fear, that are uncertain. Courage is stepping into our fear, right? Again, courage is, we've heard it all the time, but people forget it cannot exist in the absence of fear. And this is proved neurologically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Courage is a switch. And when we choose the fight response, it's a specific switch that gets clicked in our brain, which gives us a dopamine reward, right? So that is fear. That is the expression neurologically of fear. Of courage. That choice doesn't happen unless fear is present, right? So practicing courage is something that is always going to help. Perseverance. Listen, that's
practicing courage. I talk about this a bit, and I say, in my course, Go For Your Win, I talked about it, which is something I released 5 years ago. I've talked about it in a lot of different posts and commentaries. The way that I encourage people to do that is to attack some trivial fear.
Mm-hmm.
So like find something that you're afraid of, again, that doesn't have a high correlation to ridiculous danger. Like don't do proximity flying, base jumping when you're afraid of heights. Like
right.
go for a regular parachute, man.
That's
like
right.
it's all
That's
good.
Right.
But you don't need to like up the stakes super high. And I think, for anybody listening who wants to practice this, one of the things that I do when I want to work on my courage, and I'll test myself every now and then, is during this time of year, we get tree cockroaches that find their way into my house,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they just come from the trees and then they work their way through whatever little crevices, those little buggers. I don't like them at all.
Yeah.
I don't like them. They somehow bother me more than they should because they're not dangerous.
Sure.
So normally I'll let them out. Well, now we have cats, and the cats like destroy them.
Right.
They like go out hunting at night, and there's little carcasses all over the house. However, before that, I would see one and I would say like, all right, my choices are here. I don't like smashing them.
Right. Yeah,
So I like to let them out, but I can either do what I normally do and trap them and shuffle them out without having to touch them, or I could grab them with my hand
Mm-hmm.
and watch them try to squirm out between the little cracks in my fingers. And it elicits like that fear response, just in a small way.
Yeah.
But when I'm able to successfully do that, for that next like 4 hours, I'm like, I am all that is man. I feel different about myself. I look my lens of perception out into the world, and through myself, I think of myself as someone who's a different human being.
Yeah. That is the dopamine hit. I mean, we literally, people have to understand this. When we're given that choice, fight or flight, okay? And again, freeze is often talked about, but freeze is literally just an oscillation. Neurologically, it's an oscillation between the two. You're trying to decide. When we choose to fight, which means step into our fear, our brain gives us, our body gives us a dopamine hit. And dopamine, one of the most powerful chemicals on the planet, right, says this is good, keep doing this. It makes us feel good. Mm-hmm. It's also the root of all addictive behavior, right? Stepping into our fear feels good. And so this is what we have to do. And I think what you say is absolutely correct. And what the emphasis should be is the feeling afterwards. Because if people pick something small and do it, they're going to feel great, and it's because they're getting hit with dopamine because of it, right? And then they can step and try something else, and then try something else. But
could be karaoke.
Could be,
like
again,
whatever.
It could be speaking in front. It could be starting a conversation. It could be, I don't know, you name it. It could be, listen, if you're afraid of the water, it could be swimming in a swimming pool. If you're afraid of open water, which most people are fine in swimming pools, but it's the open water. It might be just swimming out, into the open water
while someone's blaring the Jaws soundtrack.
Well, but that ups it, right? That ups
exactly.
it. So you don't want to go into a amygdala response, right? So But you're absolutely right. Practicing that those things that you're scared of. But again, it could be almost as simple as someone who is and has been out of shape their entire lives, and they really want to get in shape. They don't know how to do it. They say, well, maybe maybe they don't want to go start running or whatever. It's like, hey, I'm going to buy a pair of running shoes. That's my first step, and then when I get in, I'm going to put the running shoes by the front door, okay? And the next morning, I'm actually going to get up with an alarm, and I'm going to put on my running shoes, okay? And then the next day then I'm going to put on my running shoes. I'm going to walk outside. I mean, you can chunk this however you want. The idea is to chunk it. You have to chunk it into sizes that are meaningful enough for you, so that when you accomplish it, you feel that feeling, right? If you were to just say with the cockroaches, hey, I'm just gonna put it in a cup, right? It's not a meaningful enough chunk for you, right? So the size of the chunks have to be subjective. But yes, courage can absolutely be practiced.
Yeah, it's and some of these things you have to just actually do it. Like you can't just put your legs in the cold plunge.
Unless that step is meaningful for you.
Okay,
right?
So that's a good way to think about it.
If putting your feet if just putting your feet is meaningful, that's cool. Would I recommend it? No, because you're just going to feel how cold it is, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You might as well just go in. But if it's meaningful for you, then you do that for a minute, and you're like, oh my gosh, I just did that. You will feel, again, it's all subjective. So
that's a beautiful way to look at it, about how to decide like how much to do,
what the step
and
is.
not use this objective metric of what you have to do.
Right.
So even if it's, let's say it's a cold shower, just turn it cold for a little bit.
Yes.
Like just feel it, and you'll know where that meaningful moment is to you, and don't cheat yourself.
Yeah. You get that dopamine hit, because you will love it, if you do it, and you'll feel it, and you're like, okay, I'm going to do it again tomorrow, or take the next step. And even those steps don't have to be necessarily immediately sequential, right? I mean, dipping your feet in the cold plunge every day for a week might be fine for you, and then you're going to find that dopamine hit doesn't feel. So here's a great example. I've said it many times. I'll say it again. I don't like heights. Okay, and so on every SEAL base, there's an obstacle course. West Coast at Buds, East Coast. And on every obstacle course, there's a cargo net climb. Okay, the cargo net climb is a 65-foot net that goes straight up, and you basically climb up one side, and once you're at the top, you flip over, and then you climb down. Okay, for people who don't like heights, it's tough, right?
Yeah.
Well, when I was even when I was in the teams, I'd usually go whenever I'd go for a run. I'd plan my run that I'd go by that cargo net, and when I hit it, I'd climb to the top. And at the top, which is the worst part, right, I would just sit there. And sitting there, I could feel, I basically was breathing in the fear. I would feel nervous. I'd just sit there, and I'd feel the wind and the sway and all that stuff. And then I'd go down. And I'd do that over and over again. After a while, a week or maybe even 2 weeks, after a while, when I got at the top, I didn't feel it. I feel awesome when I finished it. After a while, I wasn't scared anymore. It's basically inoculation. It's fear inoculation. But when you inoculate yourself, you also lose the dopamine reward, right? So if people are going to take these steps, they have to take them in context with the size and bite they want to take, and they have to take them until you're not getting that reward anymore. And as soon as you don't get that reward, you need to up the ante, and take the next step, because you will inoculate yourself after a period of time.
This is courage. Let's go through the other ones.
Okay, perseverance. So perseverance is interesting. What was cool about writing the book is I got to dive into these things in ways I never thought about them before. And what I recognize with perseverance is it in fact is a combination of three things. It's a combination of persistence, tenacity, and fortitude. And the reason why it's a combination of those things is because persistence and tenacity people often think are synonymous, but they're not. Persistence is I'm going to basically do something over and over again until I get a result. Okay, that's the stonecutter approach, right? The stonecutter taps the stone in the same place, 80 times, 90 times, never sees anything, and on the 100th tap, it breaks, right? That's persistence. Sometimes persistence is required. You have to just have to go head down and do it. Tenacity is I'm going to try something, and if it doesn't work, I'm going to try something else. I'm going to change and try something else. This is the car mechanic, right? The car mechanic will check the belts first. If it's not the belts, then they'll check the fuel injector or whatever, right? You don't want necessarily a persistent mechanic, right? Because the persistent mechanic is going to check the belts and then check the belts again and then check the belts again and check the belt, and you just get a high bill, right? You don't necessarily want a tenacious stonecutter, okay? Because the rock's never going to break, okay? So you have a balance between the two, and then you have fortitude. Fortitude is really just that. Fortitude is really my, I guess, definition of what mental toughness really is. Fortitude is the ability to kind of understand and move through either persistence and tenacity and make stuff happen, right? So those two are buttressed by fortitude. All that combined is perseverance. Perseverance is the ability to kind of move and step through, continue on. People think of perseverance, people think of grit as its own attribute, but the attribute that best describes what people think grit is actually perseverance, right? And the reason why it's only one part of grit is because grit is actually bigger. Total grit is much bigger than just pushing through. It's the ability to push through and do it again and do it again, which is why you need also adaptability and you need resilience. So that's perseverance. And then we get adaptability. Adaptability is, listen, everything in this universe changes, okay, without exception. I mean, I don't think they've found anything that doesn't change over time, okay? And so when the world and the environment...
Yeah, you got to talk real spiritual and go, God.
Right.
If you want to talk about what doesn't
that's
change,
right? Yeah, exactly. So everything other than that, I guess, but I mean, in our physical world, I mean, we have to recognize that the environment is going to change around us outside of our control, and it will be impossible and futile to push against it, right? Sometimes we just have to adapt. This is the dinosaur or the frog, right? If you don't adapt, you go extinct. And so adaptation is something that we all need if we want to have overall total grit, because the environment's grit typically is expressing an environment of uncertainty and change and volatility and things like that. And so we have to be willing to and able to adapt inside of that.
That's why, it's important to train all of these specific fears, but it's important to find new ones. Like if I mastered this cockroach thing, which despite the fact that I've done it enough times, I wouldn't quite say that I've mastered it.
Right.
But if I did it enough in a row, I'm sure I could actually master that thing. But that's not the point. The point is not to make me the great cockroach whisperer of the world, right?
Well, and that's right. Then you inoculate yourself.
Then I'll inoculate myself, then it won't be a big deal. And then when it comes to something else, I'll just be just as squeamish.
It doesn't unfortunately transfer between contexts.
Right. So, but what does transfer is the grit to push
process,
myself through.
Is the process.
Exactly.
Right. So it's really incumbent on us to practice the process versus repeat the environment. So that we're better prepared, because that's really what moving through uncertainty is. So you have adaptability, and then finally you have resilience. Resilience is absolutely necessary for grit, because grit involves the ability to kind of keep doing it. That's true grit, is keep doing it. If you get hit and you're done, right? That's not grit. Grit involves the ability to kind of bounce back as well. And so resilience is that, hey, I get knocked off baseline, can I bounce back to baseline? Either direction, right? Because really what true grit and overall drive requires is that we keep pushing through and not get sidelined by the lows and the challenges, but also not get seduced by the highs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes those small wins, they're great in terms of getting us a little bit more of a biochemical boost, but we can't rest on our laurels. We can't stop there, and so resilience is about the ability to kind of understand that elasticity of the process. And so those four combined add up to overall grit. And again, grit speaks to this kind of ability to move through these acute challenges. If we were to talk about long-term goal setting, that we get into the drive attributes. But I think those are that grit is, I think, the most important. If anybody wanted to kind of say, hey, I just want to focus on four, those would be the four to focus on.